Hello, this is Mike Kelleher with the Maryland MEP, and welcome back to our Make It in Maryland Manufacturing Spotlight Series. Today, I am excited to be joined by Ryan Helwig of TEConomy Partners for a little bit of a different conversation than our normal. Maryland MEP engaged TEConomy Partners to do a pretty deep dive market study of the industry, the manufacturing industry in Maryland. And we're excited that Ryan's joining us today and looking forward to the conversation and hearing some of his insights as to what's going on in the manufacturing space in Maryland. So Ryan, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Give us just a little bit of an introduction of yourself.
Well, thanks, Mike, and great to be with you. I work with TEConomy Partners. We have a 20+ year track record of working across states, across the nation, different regions, in what we generally refer to as technology-based or innovation-led economic development. So while we are industry agnostic or technology agnostic, we work across all different sectors and technology areas. We have focused over time in the manufacturing space, and our charge here and the focus here is really exciting around this digital transformation that's happening across manufacturing. And what we bring that's a little bit different, we're not consultants on the technology implementation and whatnot, but we think about all of this, about how we grow the industry, how we remain competitive as an industry in Maryland in this case, and really how we, from an economic development perspective, think about programs and workforce development and all these assets and aspects of a really thriving ecosystem. So that's how we've approached this work, and really kicking the tires on what Maryland's about in manufacturing, but also how we could think about, and even rethink some of the programming and investments that the state's making around manufacturing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. So as Ryan shared, this is the study that we were referring to, and it is actually available on the MEP website, so www.mdmep.org. And a little bit about that, right? So gosh, about a year ago, Ryan, Maryland MEP reached out to TEConomy and engaged you all to help us put this study together, to do a deeper dive look. And I know we challenged you and we tasked you to look at a couple things, right? We wanted to know what the manufacturing industry looked like in Maryland. What are the sectors that were emerging and where were the greatest opportunities for Maryland? But more important, how do technology and workforce play into those emerging industries? So can you talk to us a little bit about the study and the scope and kind of what you guys looked at?
Yeah, sure. So we like to combine lots of quantitative data and the sort of insights we can glean from that with the qualitative. So we started out and the reports got lots of details in what we called a baseline assessment. Where are we at as an industry in Maryland from an employment perspective, from an output perspective? We looked at exporting. And as you mentioned, we took a deep dive into what is Maryland manufacturing about? What makes it unique? And we identified 7 individual, very distinct and varied industry clusters, if you will, within manufacturing. So everything from aerospace and defense and life sciences to food production, to precision manufacturing, printing and packaging, wood products, all these great things that a lot of Marylanders are aware about, but we sort of put some parameters on, we're able to identify. But then it was very important. I mean, none of this can be done in a vacuum. So some good engagement, both from an advisory committee that you all set up with Maryland manufacturing leaders, representatives from MEP, and leaders within the government sphere, Department of Commerce and Labor, folks who focus and live this industry each and every day. So we were getting regular input and check-ins with that group. But also, having one-on-one conversations with manufacturing leaders to understand, really, where are you on this digital transformation, this journey? What are your pain points? What resources can you access, or what might really help you get over the hump on this in terms of assessing where you're at, as far as automation, investments, digital transformation, harnessing all this great data. that comes out of sort of the 4.0 environment. So it had to be both that quantitative and qualitative, and there's lots in it for people who are oriented towards both. If you check out the study, we know folks don't tend to drive towards an appendix, but lots of good detail on each cluster and sort of the geographic context and the various data elements. But it's got to be combined with that qualitative in terms of what are we seeing and what investments should we be making.
So I'm going to push you a little bit out of your comfort zone, Ryan, because I know you love the quantitative, right? And so when we look at Maryland, depending on the data source, depending on who you ask, there's roughly 4,000 manufacturers in Maryland, and I get asked this question as the director of the MEP all the time, and people will say, well, what is Maryland known for? What industries are we known for? And you touched on a little bit how you guys narrowed it down to a couple key sectors or a couple key segments. But let's talk about the top three. What were the top three segments that you found Maryland to have some weight behind, some gravitas behind what we do and how we work and really a presence?
Yeah, I hate to sort of skim off the top, but if you're talking about sort of size, presence, export context, I think you'd have to hone in on a few here. Aerospace and defense systems and Maryland's context around navigation, guidance, security instrumentation, communications equipment, the companies like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed, but also L3 Harris and Advanced Thermal Batteries. We have this cadre of companies doing real powerhouse work and leading work in the aerospace defense segment, and that really the other I'll mention is life sciences, and those two really are often running in terms of having really technical workforces, scientific, sort of the STEM workforce that you need to implement Industry 4.0. So life sciences is another. We know, and our group does a lot of work in life sciences, that Maryland has been a leader in this segment and has emerged over the past several decades. Lots of exciting work in biopharmaceuticals and medical devices, which have unique, as you know, manufacturing contexts. But again, big export context, lots of variety in that sector and emergence. And then the other I would mention is the food and beverage manufacturing segment. I think we learned a lot about that. We knew about some household names in Maryland, but I'll be honest, we didn't know and understand the breadth and the size of that sector. It's definitely one of the largest manufacturing components. And again, a variety of companies, some struggling with different automation challenges for sure. And it's not monolithic. So as you all know, you got to get with individual manufacturers and understand their pain points. So I would mention those three offhand. But as we mentioned, we've got 7 that we've detailed in the report.
So let's talk about the first two for a minute, the aerospace and defense and the life sciences, the biopharma. It's probably obvious to some, but to some of our viewers, it may not be obvious. What do you think the impact of Maryland's geographic location and our proximity to the federal government and some of the federal labs and some of the research universities we have, what do you think the impact of that geographic proximity is on those sectors really beginning to emerge in Maryland?
Yeah, it's huge, and it's very logical that these have grown up in Maryland. I think we give a lot of kudos to the state for nurturing those segments. But the federal, complex there, the location of some strategic military facilities, certainly makes a lot of sense, from an aerospace and defense context. But that plays out outside of the sort of DC industrial complex as well into Southern Maryland, and lots of manufacturers engaged, including small and mid-sized manufacturers that folks might not think of that are working on some real key challenges and tap into that ecosystem. From a life sciences perspective, I think, having NIH in the state having the complex that NIH, sort of that emanates from NIH. Again, Maryland has done a great job of seizing on that, and from both a biopharma and medical device perspective, in a geography perspective, it makes a lot of sense to us. And again, sometimes you raise some companies that leave the state in the life sciences or might get acquired, but Maryland's done a good job of hanging on to it. And I think complementing that is your university research base as well, which, University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins, the Baltimore system, it all really contributes to a thriving ecosystem when it comes to that intensive academic industry connection you need in life sciences.
So I think all of those factors are really critical and really important. And one thing I want to ask you is, when you get into the report, for those who may download that, what I found fascinating is you guys did some analysis and some studies of the number of firms that we have here and the number of workers. And in many cases, Maryland lagged behind other areas of the country, just as far as numbers and size of firms and
Right.
workers. But where we did excel was in this adoption of technology and how innovative our companies were and how productive our companies were. Can you just talk a little bit into that?
Yeah, and I think, for those that don't know, this is a real eye opener, that don't know the segment well, the industry well. Maryland manufacturing often can be overshadowed by that federal complex and the sort of contractor complex out of DC. And while we're less concentrated in manufacturing than some other states, for instance, I live in Ohio, it's very manufacturing intensive. What we found was Maryland manufacturing has this real outsized role as an innovation engine. The sector, Mike, punches above its weight in this capacity. So, for instance, we leverage in this sector 109,000 Maryland workers every day showing up to work across the 4,000 establishments and companies you mentioned. That only represents about 5% of our workforce and about 10% of gross state product. But in terms of the innovation activities, the investments, as you mentioned, manufacturing accounts for 75% of industrial research and development, or over $3 billion annually. So that's a higher share than for the US, and it's been growing faster. And at the same time, this translates into real productivity advantages. Maryland's got a much higher productivity level, and the sort of output per worker in Maryland is much higher than the national average, and it's been growing faster. So, there's a lot to work with. There's a lot to be excited about. And if anybody ever wondered why we should invest in this sector, it's truly because of this high value add. Each worker in Maryland manufacturing is going and punching well above their weight every day. And that's huge for the state. And the state must continue to make manufacturing a priority because of this outsized impact.
You're hired, Ryan. You're telling my story for me.
We want to help, Mike. Yeah, we want to help.
We share that message every day with our stakeholders and our legislators and even our constituents, the parents, the educators, the schools, of the importance on manufacturing on Maryland's economy. I before I get into workforce, because I do want to touch on that and some of the things you said, you hit on the use of technology and the adoption of technology, and you talked a little bit about these Industry 4.0 technologies that we hear about. How do you think manufacturers in general and Maryland manufacturers across our industry clusters are embracing technology so that they can remain competitive in an otherwise, pretty difficult or pretty costly state to compete in? How are manufacturers in Maryland using technology to their advantage?
Yeah, and I know we'll get to workforce, but the challenges around workforce are driving a lot of that, right? So as we talk to manufacturers and wanted to sort of dive into, really tangible investments. I think what we saw is there's an extensive use of robotics and general automation, and even collaborative robots, what people are calling cobots, that work more closely and directly with their human counterparts. That's exciting. I think we're seeing more on the sort of advanced and automated tracking of supply chains. This has become critical, and especially for a couple of those industries that I mentioned earlier, for aerospace and defense and for life sciences. That sort of notion of chain of custody, of secure supply chains, of understanding where things are in real time is huge. We're seeing exciting investments in simulation and modeling. Can we understand, get out in front of, and predict maintenance needs? Can we help bring our new employee along with some, AR or VR technologies where they're able to engage that way? We're seeing use of, additive manufacturing, 3D printing. So all of this is really exciting, but I think where we saw the need for continued investment, or what we'd like to come back in 5 years and see more of, is really around, harnessing those one-off technologies in a more comprehensive fashion. So if we're in this sort of cyber physical world of sensing and harnessing data, are we really optimizing that? Does it work with our current back-end systems and underlying IT infrastructure? Are our workers able to, make actionable decisions and insights and use that intelligence in real time? So I think while we're encouraged by what we've seen in terms of those investments, getting to that next level is really the next stage here.
Well, and I'll echo that. We're excited about those opportunities, and we're seeing the same thing. And I think some of the industries you just touched on, it's natural for them to be the early adopters of technology. And now what we're trying to do is take that same level down to the small and the mid-sized guys, right? And some of the other sectors, the food and beverage you talked about is an industry that's just exploding in the state. And everywhere we look, we have a craft brewer, a small bakery, or a food production company, or companies that are making spices and additives that go into food. And as the cost curve changes as well, we're seeing these small firms adopt things like cobots or case packers or sensors on their line to measure temperature and flow. So we're excited to see that shift in technology, and it becomes more cost effective for the small and mid-sized guys to adopt.
And that's
one of the drivers of that, and you touched on, is this competitive workforce world, right? The cost of workers, the reliability of workers, the ease of finding workers. Can you talk a little bit about what we found or what we saw in the report from a workforce standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we have both sort of the quantitative and the qualitative. And I think first of all, we like to look at the sort of what we call the industry 4.0 enabling workforce. What are those occupations that are very specific to developing solutions, implementing solutions, and on the production lines, and thinking about what's next, leveraging these data insights. And Maryland's outsized presence in that is a real asset or advantage. But it's not uniform across industries. So aerospace and defense, life sciences have this in spades. In our wood products segment, our food products, less of a sort of enabling workforce there. So, but then at the same time, I mean, as you can imagine, Mike, and I think others listening can relate. I mean, this is a very challenging labor market. The COVID experience, some of the retirements that we saw in manufacturing during that period, some of the attrition there, and the resulting sort of spike in wages that we've seen post-COVID. Wonderful for workers, but tough on manufacturers when you're competing against, tech and the Amazons of the world and those types of things. So what we really found was, hey, as we look down, there's some great data points in the report you can refer to. 80% of our manufacturers in 2021 were saying, hey, we're out there hiring, we're looking for workers. But guess what? 80% said we're having trouble finding the skills and the abilities that we need. So what we've tried to do in the study is really think and have this forward-looking perspective about how we need to bring people along from an upskilling perspective. A lot of these technologies are not eliminating jobs, but they're changing the nature of the jobs. So we got to think about how we can really flexibly upskill our incumbent workers, and also think about this pipeline coming through and orienting them digitally. And the result is a lot of enhanced or sort of hybrid skill sets, this mechanical, technical combo, this ability for our engineers to understand data sciences better, our production technicians to understand what the output is telling us, from a data or intelligence perspective, and how we leverage that in real time, so that, we're not having downtime, or we can predict those maintenance needs. So lots on the workforce side, but I will say that the pain points there were really, in the conversations we had with manufacturing leaders, really driving this automation transformation and some of the investments being made. So I don't think that's going to change, Mike. I'd love to say that we're going to see this huge wave of workers excited and jumping into manufacturing. I think perceptions are changing about manufacturing careers, which is awesome, and they need to. But we've got to keep our eye on the ball to stay competitive as a state. We have to embrace this digital transformation and smart manufacturing, and really communicate that to workers that, hey, your job might change, but this is about new skills and new technical capabilities.
No, I love it. And so, Ryan, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. When you all prepared this study, we had you go out and look at other states. We had you go look at other programs around the country that were working. And some of what we looked at was modeled after that. But in the interest of kind of closing out our discussion in a really good note, you guys came back with 3, 4, 5 recommendations of things that Maryland MEP, things that the state of Maryland, things that our manufacturing industry can do to really move the needle, to move our industry forward and into the future, so that we can remain competitive. What are the top 2, right? And or what are 2 of those recommendations or strategies that you think, as a state, Maryland could really embrace to make a difference in our manufacturing sector?
Yeah, so as we really dug in on, hey, what are the barriers to adopting these technologies? The costs, especially for SMEs, for our small and mid-sized manufacturers and enterprises, are significant. And the way a lot of state economic development programs have been oriented, and we've done some of this work in orientation in other places, is often about how many jobs you're adding or what new physical plant you're establishing. And we're trying to help change that mindset a little bit. And I hope we're getting there, because we're starting to see some states around the country reorient towards these digital investments. If our manufacturer, our mid-sized manufacturer, in greater Baltimore, is looking to make some key software and cyber physical investments, sensing around their production line. A lot of times there's not state programs geared towards that. And so what we've recommended is, a grant program where the company has some skin in the game, but the state can provide some resources toward those key investments. And, being responsible, thinking clearly about, are those in the sort of 4.0 space that makes sense? And is this company ready for those types of investments? So that's a big recommendation here. And Mike, I'm thrilled to see you all getting some traction there. And, other states, Indiana, Iowa, Connecticut, Massachusetts, these states are putting in millions of dollars to help their small and mid-sized manufacturers make these types of digital transforming investments. I think the other thing is really thinking hard about, some of these other barriers, related to workforce, related to systems integration, related to how we start this journey. So some other states are really, putting out there resources to test, to pilot, to demonstrate technologies. As we talked to some Maryland manufacturers, that there was some frustration there. Oftentimes, if somebody sees them as a competitor, they don't want to show them their new bells and whistles, right? So what we want to see is sort of this neutral playing field. Can we establish, a demonstration lab like some other states are doing? Can we bring folks together under the MEP banner, truly, to kick the tires on some of these, to hear case studies, to hear about the ROI and the payback on these? Just some of that baseline information for starting the journey is key. And then rethinking some of our workforce programming and how we think about new micro-credentialing approaches or stackable badges or credentials or certificates for that incumbent workforce, because expecting somebody to go back to school for 4 years or enter the classroom in that sort of traditional manner is just not going to work. So, I would encourage people to sort of take a look at what we've talked about and sort of making the case for these investments, but then reading through some of those strategies and actions that we think can move the needle.
Ryan, that is actually a perfect transition. As I said, I really appreciate the effort that you guys put in. I think the data and some of what you found, I found fascinating, and we're using that and your recommendations to help craft our strategy as MEP and
Great.
And to work closely with the state of Maryland and the Maryland Department of Commerce and our federal stakeholders to create new programs and services that are going to take Maryland manufacturing into the future. As you know, we're a very proud bunch here in Maryland. We got our Proud to Make It in Maryland banner behind me. We're proud of our flag. We're proud of our manufacturers that we have here in the state. So there's no shortage of that, and our goal is to continue to have Maryland be kind of that leader, right? That leader in being innovative, that leader in being competitive. And so we thank you for that and for the work that you all did. And I would encourage all of our viewers to download that report and take a read of some of those recommendations. So Ryan, before we close out, what was the most interesting piece of information or the most surprising or shocking or intriguing thing that you learned through this project? You're an Ohio guy. We're trying to get you to come to Maryland. We're obviously proud of our state and Big Ten rivals there on the football side, but what was the most intriguing thing you learned from this project?
Yeah, I think, Mike, I'm always just impressed with the breadth of products and services and what's being shipped out globally and the markets that you all are involved in. I think as an outsider, coming in, although we have done significant work in Maryland, some of these areas of expertise and of market leading capabilities really impress me, the breadth of it. And you can go from Western Maryland to Eastern Maryland, Northern to Southern, and see, wood products and, precision manufacturing and the life sciences being addressed with new cures. But at the end of the day, I think it's going back to that value add and that productivity, and just truly impressed with what is, among sort of the national leading, value adding activities and innovation happening in Maryland. And it makes me really excited. And I think there's a great future ahead for the sector, Mike. So just great to work with you all. The MEP team is wonderful. And I will encourage those manufacturers out there in Maryland to, if they're not already engaged with you, get engaged, because I think there's a lot of value in what you all bring to the table, and a lot of good programs in Maryland that manufacturers are frankly unaware of that we need to make sure they're connected to. So it's been great, Mike, and thanks again for engaging us.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's Ryan Helwig from TEConomy Partners. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mike Kelleher with the Maryland MEP. This is our Make It in Maryland Manufacturing Spotlight Series. Thanks again.